as I talked to women in the developing world, and I would see this amazing ingenuity in them and the lengths they would go to lift their families up, I thought, my gosh, if I'm in this position, I need to use my voice on behalf of them. And that's what being a leader is. I went to an all-girls high school, and what that does for your self-esteem, I could be good at anything. I wasn't competing against boys, and so I learned to use my voice as a young woman, and that was very powerful. One of the messages we all got from my parents is we would be college going. It wasn't an option. We were going to college because college was your ticket to getting a great job and being able to sustain yourself. To get to the colleges I wanted to go to study computer science, I had to be valedictorian. I was definitely nervous. I went home in tears and saying to my mom, oh my gosh, now I have to write this speech. And then when it came time to rehearse the speech, she said, go back to your drama teacher who believed in you. And so I did, and my drama teacher was in tears over the speech. And I thought, I think I have it. So these are the words I wrote. So if you are successful, it is because somewhere, sometime, someone gave you a life or an idea that started you in the right direction. Remember also that you are indebted to life until you help some less fortunate person just as you were helped. I met with my hiring manager at IBM. She said, are you ready to accept? And I said, I have this one last company I'm going from here to interview with, and then I'll let you know. And she said, well, would you mind me asking who it is? And I said, no, it's this company, Microsoft. And she stopped me dead in my tracks, and she said, if you get a job offer from that company, you should take it. They were just so excited and passionate about what they were doing. And they so believed in what they were doing. And I saw the difference good software could make, and I was excited about being part of that change. Several months later, he said, I was thinking maybe we could go out if you give me your phone number, 2 weeks from tonight. And I said to him, 2 weeks from tonight? I said, I have no idea what I'm doing 2 weeks from tonight. And I said, you aren't spontaneous enough for me. And so it was really sweet. He called me about an hour later and he said, is this spontaneous enough for you? And I said, okay, well, that's pretty spontaneous. I guess we can try. Late in the dating stages, we talked about the wealth, and it was our first trip to Africa. And it was at the end of that trip on a beach walk that we said, absolutely, the vast majority of these resources will go back to society. We just committed to it. It was just a natural, easy decision for us. My children were getting just a little bit older, and I kept thinking, if I'm telling my girls at home, especially my oldest daughter, that she should step out as a woman and use her voice in the world, I thought, am I role modeling that for her? We have a moral imperative to lift up everybody in the world, but we haven't really done a lot of big things for women. And yet, if you get the other half of society working, there's this unbelievable opportunity. So you lift a woman up and she lifts up her whole family, and that lifts up a community. I learned that there were 220 million women that want access to contraceptives, and the women were so vociferous. They would say to me, I can't have another child, I have 3. If I have another one, I can't feed that child. And we weren't giving them access because of things that had happened in the family planning community, and because of the controversy, particularly in the United States. I'm a practicing Catholic, and I'm also very outspoken about the fact that I use contraceptives. With the Catholic Church, we share a really close mission around the poor. So with the church, I focus on our common mission. In the last 15 years, we've made huge progress as a world. We've really brought down poverty. We've cut it in half. We've almost cut maternal mortality in half. I want to see us half those numbers yet again in the next 15 years. I want to be remembered for lifting up women and girls. I want us to know that not just one life has breathed easier, but I want to know that millions of women's lives have been breathed easier and that their families have done better. When you get to the point where women are lifting themselves up, then you know you've gotten there, and I want to be part of that.
So, Melinda, welcome to AOL's Build. We're so thrilled to have you here and joining us on the stage, and thank you all for being here today. We are thrilled to have such a large audience here supporting Melinda Gates, the co-chair of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So thank you. I do want to share with you, I want to talk about all the incredible work that you have done for women and girls around the world, and I want to talk about yesterday's big announcement, the full participation report. But first, I want to talk about you. And I had the unbelievable opportunity to sit down with Melinda for an hour, and we went through the major milestones in your life. And one of the things that really struck me was how values-based your life has been, and how so much of what you had instilled in you as a young girl shaped who you are today. As you know, last week, Sheryl Sandberg launched her Lean In Together, all about how we can help, how men can help us achieve gender equality. And I'm curious about you and your father and the influence that he had on you and the work that you've done.
Great. Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Dylan. So nice of you, and for everybody that's in the room today and your interest. It really wasn't until about 6 months ago that I even heard the statistics about how important it is for a father to believe that his daughter can be good in math and science, what a difference that makes in a girl's life. But I had that as a young girl. My father was an engineer. He worked on the early Apollo missions. And one of the things he would often talk about at home about his work was that he always knew his team was going to be better when there was this one female mathematician in his company that he could get on his team. They had these rotating teams, and he was always vying to get her on the team because he said their work product was always better when she was there. And so as a young girl, I knew my father believed that girls could be good in math and science. We talked about math and science at home. And then it was really interesting in high school when I started to get interested in computers. I had a teacher who taught me in math, and she went to the head nun of the school that I went to, and I went to an all-girls Catholic high school, and she advocated to get us girls some computers, about 10 Apple IIs. And my dad at home decided that he would buy an Apple III for my sister and I to keep the books of this company that my family had, the small company that was going to put us through college, this rental business, and so we could start to learn to program. And as Bill points out now, there are probably only about 1,000 of those machines that were ever made, but we own still an Apple III.
That's probably the only part of your narrative that mentions the word Apple. All right, let's do the next slide, which you already saw. I mean, what does that conjure up when you look at that? Youth, I know. What I love about the picture, and you tell me if this is true, we all have a bet in our team. Did you set it up, self-timer?
Yes, it was a bit of a self-timer on my just little still camera, absolutely. You know, they used to click down like 45 seconds and then they take it, yeah.
I love it. Well, you and your husband have created one of the most powerful foundations in the world. You are literally changing the world. But what I want to know is, what's it like to work with your husband?
It's enjoyable. I really do enjoy it. And we built a new building about a couple of years ago, and the previous building that we were renting in, we didn't think through our offices. Somebody else had set them up, but when I was very purposeful making our offices for the new building, in our old building, we had two offices that were side by side with kind of an ante-room in between, and we could pass, without going out in front where people could see us, we could pass between our offices to go, tap one another on the shoulder or say something. And I set our new offices up the same way because I liked it so much. And one of the things that's fun about working with Bill is he's going to get into whatever, he's going to be passionate about whatever the issue is that he throws himself into. And I think that passion is very infectious at work. Sometimes I'm in the role of saying, okay, let's tamp down the passion just a little bit here and there. But we really enjoy working together and enjoy talking about the foundation and what we're trying to accomplish.
And what are your different skill sets?
I think we both believe in data, but Bill, I think the thing that Bill has really taught me is that you know something really deeply when you can explain it and teach it to somebody else. And so that's become my litmus test of, do I really understand this area, this health area, well enough that I could explain it to people who don't know the area? And then the thing I think Bill's learned from me is how you get teams. To really get the best out of a team, you have to inspire them, and you have to get them to work together and have these shared goals and have the same passion that you have. And you really have to think through purposely how you're going to do that. It's not, leading by directive. We're not only leading inside the foundation, but we're leading many partners on the ground, and they don't have to be on this journey with us. And so we have to inspire them to do that.
Which you do so well. Okay, the next slide. So one of the things that really struck me in our interview is you talked about how in the early days of the foundation, you really took on a private persona. And then at one point, you decided, you know what, I'm going to have a more public profile at the foundation. Tell me a little bit about that decision and why you were private at the beginning, and then why you decided to, make that forward-facing move.
Well, I thought first and foremost for my children that it would be easier for them if I was a private citizen, particularly when they were young, that we could even enroll in little mommy and me classes or preschool. We'd use my maiden name. I wasn't known in the community. And so for the first few weeks of the class, we were just like everybody else. We were just, a parent and child from the community. Eventually, they'd figure out who we were, or that Bill was the CEO of the Microsoft at the time. But because we'd already established ourselves there, they knew us for who we were. And I thought that was really important for my kids if they were going to have their own sense of self and their own self-esteem in their communities. So I stayed very private. As my girl, our oldest daughter is a girl, Jen. She's 18. She's off at college now. But as she became older and started into middle school, I really thought about the values I was instilling in her and how I was talking to her about using her voice in the world and choosing what she'd be in the world. And I realized that I needed to use my voice in the world, and that the kids were far enough along on their journey and in their school life that they were known for who they were as people. I felt that. And that I could speak out more. And I was so passionate. When I'm on the ground in the developing world, I meet with families a lot, men and women, but particularly the women. And I thought, if I can give voice to their issues in some way, I really ought to use this position I have, this platform I have, and I should mirror my values to my daughters. If I'm telling them to use their voice in the world, I should use mine in the world too. And so I stepped out for those reasons.
I think it's important for all of us. There are so many working moms I know in the audience, and that theme of wanting to role model is an important thing, whether you're Dylan McGee or Melinda Gates. I think of it as the same thing.
It is the same thing.
Yes.
It's the same for moms all over the world. It doesn't matter what your name is.
All right, let's go to the next slide. I love this photo. Clearly, travel has been such an important part of what you've done, and it's inspired. Tell us a little bit about that.
I think the joy, honestly, comes from situations like this. I spend a lot of time in the rural areas in remote India or Tanzania or Kenya or places in Africa. I also spend time in the slums, actually in the big urban settings. And it's so interesting because if you sit down and you're really interested in learning about people's lives and you try to take off your Western hat and just say, what if I was this mother or father? What if I was in these circumstances? Why would I make the decisions I make? What length would I go to educate my child or feed them? It is amazing the commonality between human beings. And you touch that when you sit with these villagers in the village. That could be me. I mean, how was it that as Warren Buffett says, that I got lucky enough, or he got lucky enough, or you got lucky enough to be born in this country at this time? And so when they'll share their lives with you, you realize how much we have in common, humanity around the world. And it's really a really beautiful thing.
Well, one of the things that you didn't see in the video, but one of the commitments, and I'll read it so I get it right, is that you, along with the United Nations and Prime Minister Cameron, have led the world to provide access to contraceptives to more than 120 million women in developing countries by 2020. 120 million. That's big. And one of the things that I am curious about, again, as I put myself in your shoes, not to make this a common theme or anything, but I think you have the ability to make an impact. And how do you choose what to focus on?
Well, this was one of those, this particular issue, contraceptives, was one that I really wrestled with. And again, as I would be out talking to these moms in these remote places, I would be out to talk to them about childhood vaccines. I wanted to know about what lengths they go to, which ones they knew about, et cetera. But if I stayed long enough, they would bring the conversation back around and they'd say, but what about that shot I used to get in my arm? That's the predominant form of birth control, is a shot that you get in Africa, Depo-Provera, a contraceptive. You get it every 3 months. And they'd say, why can't I get it? I go to that health clinic. I walk 10 kilometers. I didn't tell my husband I was going, and it's not there. And it was sort of this life and death, not sort of, it is a life and death crisis for them. But I would hear as I would go out, this theme kept coming up over and over and over again in these visits, and it became this rallying cry. And again, I was still quite a private figure at the time. I was a little more public, but I kept looking for the advocate. I learned about the issue. I figured out why it wasn't on the global health agenda, why we actually had, at that time, 210 million women asking us for contraceptives, it turns out. I learned the issue. I realized it had been quite politicized, a lot of issues around it. We'd taken it off the global health agenda, and so I kept looking for the advocate that I could find to put it back on the agenda. And I finally realized I couldn't find the advocate, and that I needed to put my voice behind that issue. And so I stepped out on the global stage to say, this is too important to let it be a politicized issue, when in fact we use contraceptives in the United States. We use them, predominantly women in the United States, even Catholic women, more than 90% report using contraceptives. And we sort of take them for granted, but why should we have them and other women not?
Well, and that's what I wanted to ask you too, because we talk a little bit in the video about, you're a practicing Catholic, and that was hard for you. And tell us a little bit about how you worked through that.
Yeah, so I really went back to kind of my family's history around the issue. I talked to my parents about it. But at the end of the day, I use contraceptives. I have 3 children. They're all 3 years apart. I use contraceptives. And it's what's allowed me to space their births so that I could work, which I wanted to do. And so as I thought about it, and I thought I don't have a moral issue with contraceptives themselves. In fact, the Global Coalition, there isn't much controversy about contraceptives. And I thought, I want to do something for women all over the world, women in these low-income countries, and this should be the issue. And the Catholic Church and I actually have a very shared mission. We do a lot of work around the poor, but we have a different point of view on this. But just because I'm Catholic doesn't mean I shouldn't speak out on what I believe in. And there was a woman in Nairobi who summed it up really well. I met with a group of about 30 women. I stayed about 2 hours. We were talking about the importance of contraceptives. Her name was Marianne. She was holding a little baby girl in her arms. And at the end, she summed up our whole conversation. And she said, I want every good thing for this child before I have another one. And that's the universal truth of being a parent. When you have a child, you want every good thing for that child. And the only way she could do that, or other women can do that, is if they can space their births.
Well, that's a great segue for me into the work that you just published yesterday and the report. And the takeaway that really stuck with me was that line, women and girls deserve to live the life they want. And to me, that was at the heart of everything that you just announced yesterday. But for those of you who don't know, there was an incredible, why don't you tell them about the full participation report and why you got involved in that?
So about 2 years ago, I teamed up with the Clinton Foundation because one of the things that I saw as I would go out and learn about these issues, it was very hard to find statistics around women. They exist in so many different databases, and when you go deep, the data is actually very, very shallow. And if you want to take action, Bill and I feel like you have to have data to know what type of action to take, and then to measure and figure out if you have progress. And so as I started to see that these issues were not coalesced in one place and that we had huge gaps in the data, I teamed up with them to do this report called No Ceilings, and it's basically getting full participation of women in society. And we looked at basically 1.8 million data points that do exist in the world for women around in 200 different countries, and we put them all in one place. We did a visualization tool so that people can see how are women actually doing in Guatemala versus Chile versus the United States versus Botswana. You know, where are we on land rights issues, property rights, food, maternal deaths? And only by having that data do we now see what progress we've actually made for women and where we need to go in the future, and where we have gaps that we need to fill in even on data to know where to go. But we've made incredible progress, but we still have a long road to travel.
Well, that leads me to our, at Makers, we love Gloria Steinem, and she has a great quote. "The truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off." So when that data started coming in, what really pissed you off?
I think particularly the data about women in the economy. We know economic opportunity unlocks women's potential in every country worldwide. And yet when you see this labor force participation gap that we have between men and women, country by country by country, and you see a wage gap, and you see that women predominantly do the unpaid labor, both particularly when their children are young or when you have aging parents, and yet they don't get paid for that. Those things upset me. And sometimes I think it's that upsetness or that anger that fuels you to actually make changes over time.
It is amazing. You should go to noceilings.org. It's .org,
yes.
Right? And, the visualizations are incredible. And, I kind of got lost in it last night because you can look at country by country and all of these. The U.S. has some things to work on,
yes.
too.
Yeah,
right?
and if you look, the thing that just glaringly struck out at me was labor force participation, because you see men up at over 80% worldwide. If you globalize all the statistics, there's this line where they're up over 80%, and women are actually stagnant and going down some in terms of labor force participation, below 55%. And I thought, it's just so glaring when you look at the graph. I guess I'm a graph person.
Pissing you off. Yeah. Well, you are looking at a very converted audience here. We've got incredible leaders at AOL, Karen Dykstra, Maureen Sullivan. We've got our board member, Pat Mitchell, here with us. What, from that report, what can we all do?
Well, I think, first of all, we need to say that we're going to make more progress on maternal mortality. So women dying needlessly in childbirth, that just shouldn't be in this day and age. And there are simple interventions that we can do if we say we care about this as a world and we hold our governments accountable and we say to the U.S. government, I want you to keep investing in maternal mortality, we can make a difference on that. And we can also make a difference in childhood death, particularly that first month of life. It's teaching women very simple things: immediately exclusive breastfeeding, keeping the cord clean, and keeping the baby warm. So saying to the U.S. government when these big funding rounds come up, I care about this, I want you to invest in it. Foreign aid is less than 1% of our entire budget, but I care about women all over the world. Voices matter. It still matters hugely in Congress. If there's not a constituency for something, they'll cut the funding. So why is funding stayed up so much globally for HIV/AIDS here in the United States? Because there's a huge constituency behind it that says HIV/AIDS is important. We need to say the same thing about maternal and child deaths and keep that pressure on Congress.
All right, you guys all have loud voices. Let's keep the pressure on. All right, my last slide, and then we'll open it up to questions, is... What do you think?
I haven't heard an announcement yet. Have you?
Not yet. All right, let's do some questions, and then we'll come back and we'll finish with our famous Makers lightning round. Questions in the audience?
I just wanted to say thank you, because the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation actually contributes to a nonprofit that got me this job. And what can people who are on the receiving end do to pay it forward?
Help some other student in need. I think particularly in the United States, the issue that we still face is that we have a whole host of students for which college is unreachable. So if you can sponsor another kid in any way through community college or help send them to Columbia, even if it's just helping them with a few $100s on their tuition, it makes a gigantic difference. I was the recipient of a small scholarship when I went to business school, and I came from a very middle-income family, and it was very helpful to our family that I could get even a little bit off of my tuition.
Thank you for sharing that.
Hi, thank you so much for being here today. I had a question about women's colleges. Recently, there's been a lot of talk that they're not relevant anymore. I was wondering what your take on that was, and whether colleges like Wellesley or Smith, what could they add to the conversation?
I think women's education is highly relevant, whether it's middle school, high school, or at university level. I think it's a phenomenal experience. It teaches women to use their voice, teaches leadership. I think some of those colleges, it would be fantastic if they put even more STEM, science, technology, and math back on the agenda more strongly. One of the other things that shocked me from this full participation report is that the time I went to university, undergraduate, 37% of the computer science degrees were going to women. I'm a computer science graduate. We thought when I was in college those numbers were going to go up. They're down at 18%. Now, how can we have a society that is so focused on technology and yet fewer and fewer women are going into it? That just shouldn't be. I don't want to live in a world where women aren't helping build the apps, create the apps that we need, the health things that we need. So I would love to see the women's colleges do, quite honestly, more investment in that.
And you talk in your interview about how being at a girls' high school helped give you the confidence and you weren't distracted, and it really helped you focus on what it was you wanted to do.
Absolutely. And I think both in middle school and at high school, girls, there's good research on this, face a confidence gap. And so they will think quite often, oh, I'm not as good as that boy in biology or math, when in fact the converse is true. They may feel more shy about, raising their hand or shouting out the answer, which a boy might do. But what a teacher needs to do is keep the girl's confidence up to know that she can be good in math. And I think an all-girls school, I'm not saying you can't do it in a co-ed school. A great teacher can do it anywhere. But I think it's a bit easier, quite honestly, in an all-girls school that's seen that issue over and over and over again.
And you're being modest. I mean, one of the stories that I love about Melinda is that she applied to Notre Dame and went to visit, and you were not happy with the computer science program, right?
Correct.
So you went to Duke instead.
Right.
Right? And you were a pioneer at the time. That was not a choice that a lot of women were making.
Yeah, I thought coming out of a Catholic school, I'd heard of so many of my friends' dads who went to Notre Dame, and I thought, I'm definitely going to Notre Dame, and I researched it, I knew all about it. But I was really bummed when I went there because they were phasing out their computer science program. It wasn't that they didn't think computers were important, but they were putting them back in the disciplines as opposed to having a dedicated program. And that's where I had applied early admission to go. And so I thought, so then I applied to a couple other universities, and Duke I went to Duke University in the end. They had just gotten a big grant from IBM and just put in 2 big labs, computer labs, and I said, okay, that's the place I want to go.
We want more girls to make that choice. All right, last question. Great.
Hi, thank you for this great conversation. I have a question about stakeholder engagement, and I was wondering if you could share some of your best practices in bringing people from nonprofit, government, corporate together to achieve a common mission.
It's a really important issue because it does take people from all sectors of society, NGOs, civil society, private sector, public sector together. I think we see it in a whole host of areas, but I'll give you one specific example. I think this issue of why are childhood deaths down, the huge progress, the most promising thing in that No Ceilings report was that childhood deaths have been cut in half since 1990. Why is that? A big piece of it, there are a bunch of reasons, but one of the big issues is that we've gotten vaccines out there. That's a global private-public partnership working at its very best to create a vaccine market in the developing world that didn't exist before. So we can go to the pharmaceuticals and say, there is a market there, we have a public-private fund, we can pull the vaccines through, and then it's up to the countries to make co-payments with those vaccines and to say, we care about them and we're going to fund them ourselves over time. But it's the very best of private sector pharmaceuticals working with a private set mindset with governments to say this is important for all children. The pharmaceutical companies still make money, but they make less than they would make in a country like Japan or the UK or US. But it is the reason we have childhood deaths down so much, that is one of the big factors.
And you played an important role in that.
The foundation did. Yeah. Yes, we were part of setting up that fund initially, and then Bill and I advocate very strongly for governments to keep putting funding into that fund.
And when you hear those results, how does that make you feel?
Pretty great. I mean, we think there's 6 million children alive because of that vaccine fund. And I have to say, and then when I hear in the United States that their parents saying, I want to opt out, I don't want my child to get a vaccine, and you see measles coming back in the United States, children will die of measles in our country. So we're going to let people opt out and let babies die here just because we've forgotten how terrible that disease is. That to me doesn't make any sense. So I think vaccines are really important. And women in the developing world know that vaccines are important.
Thank you for all that work. Okay, so now we're going to end with our famous Makers Lightning Round. Okay. Our maker, Pat Mitchell, has been through this before. Don't worry, we're not going to make you do it again. So here we go.
Okay.
It's either or. You tell me what suits you more. Beach or mountains?
Beach.
iPad or notepad?
Go ahead. Surface? I'm not very good at following the rules.
Early bird or night owl?
Early bird.
My guess. Diplomatic or direct?
Direct.
Type A or easygoing?
Type A.
Thought that one too. Higher math score or higher verbal score?
Actually, higher math score on the SATs, but I've been working on the verbal too.
Prada or Zara?
I have to say Prada. My daughter would like me to say Zara.
Prepare or cram?
Prepare.
Domestically skilled or domestically challenged?
So domestically challenged. I heat and microwave.
10 minutes early or 10 minutes late?
10 minutes early.
Book smart or street smart?
Street smart.
And the finale, Microsoft or AOL?
Microsoft. I gotta be true to where I come from.
Thank you for joining us today. Thank you all for being here. And thank you, Suzanne, for doing Build.